Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you today. I'm very excited to talk about this, as it's been a topic I've wanted to talk about for a little while, actually. And while I am going to go through my diatribe, make sure that you are all liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, doing all that great stuff. Now, the one thing I do want to say is that we are not doctors, but I have two coaches here. And so that's why we're going to talk about the role of the coach. And Pat, unfortunately, I have not heard back from. So if he jumps in, he'll jump in. All good. If not, we'll move on. The big question that I wanted to hit today is the role of the coach, because I see a lot of stuff on the internet right now of the McDojo stuff, and you have in martial arts instructors doing bad things left, right, and center, poor training, misconduct of all kinds, that kind of stuff. And I think that what it stems from is the fact that perhaps they just didn't have the basis of what a coach actually is, like what their role is, if that makes any sense. So I'd like to hear from both of you guys, and what is your definition of what the role of a coach is? So who wants to take it first?
Alan's been in the game longer than I have. I think.
Alan's up. There you go, bud. What's your concept of the role of coach?
What they shouldn't do?
What they should what they should do. What is like
That
the
would take
correct
several
role?
podcasts.
Yeah, no. I mean, reflecting back to when I first started coaching, so I actually initially started coaching in '99, when I was my first year of college in San Marcos. There was no jiu-jitsu other than being in Austin, which was almost 2 hours away. And the drive there back and forth was just killing me, taking 18 hours. And I had a part-time job, and while in the reserves, so on the weekends I'd be taking off. I was in a drill sergeant unit, and I started this team for somewhat selfish reasons because there was no jiu-jitsu. So I figured I could train some people. I'd get them up to the point where they know what they're doing. At least I would have training partners, right? So, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was still one of those things where, what is that? It was very difficult to describe. But if I said judo, at least there was stuff on the internet, or it was much more common phrase, excuse me. Even before, like, well, pre-internet, when it was still like AOL and everything. But the strange part was when I transitioned out and I went back active duty, I learned how to teach from being a drill sergeant, and that's a different type of audience that I had when I was SF. You have to be even more aggressive with the role that you have, because when I went SF and we're training the ICTF and the Iraqi commandos, we were literally going out with them that same time frame. So we could be training the daytime, and then that night we're rolling out on missions. So there was a lot more stress factor that I was putting on them. Like, you have to get this right, because me and you are going to be going out there tonight. And so there was a lot more pressure to make sure that they got everything they needed, instruction wise, to accomplish the mission properly and efficiently. Now, fast forward to when I opened up my school. I was contracting for a little bit while I was getting it set up. But the day that I opened, I hadn't even been back from deployment for a year. So it was like 9 months that I've been back from my last deployment when I opened up the school. And looking back, my intentions were right. My intentions were very protective, but they were too intense. And the running joke is, right now I think we're on Shibaro 9.0 or 8.0 or something like that. But I should have taken more time to disengage from that type of mentality that I had, where it's a life or death situation. You have to train, it's going to happen, and there is no substitute. You just have to get it right. So I was very particular with everything. And some people really took to it, but majority of people did not, because again, it's civilian mind frame that I had to readjust to, that I just didn't have the time to do it. And in my mind, I was really like lowering my standards, not as far as like the techniques, but as in like complimenting in a sense. Good job, you got that right. You know, when I was always like, especially in that environment when I was in Iraq, good job was like the worst thing you could possibly say. You never say that, you know. You got it right is about as close as you can get to a compliment, you know. But there's hardly any you know, positive enforcement there, you know, and guidance in a sense. So I started picking that up, and I mean, keep in mind, I didn't even have an understanding about my operator syndrome, the thing that was going on in my head, and something I've been dealing with pretty much my whole life is imposter syndrome. And it was an amalgam of different things putting it together that I realized I shouldn't have done. I shouldn't have been, you know, as hard on them as I was. I probably would have had a lot more. And the problem is that nobody knew me when I first started. So everyone was making up their opinions based off hearsay from the people that didn't like it. I do have AC in my gym, but I don't turn it on, including in this heat. But there's a reason for that, you know. And to this day, that's one of the things I will not bend on. Is when I first got to Iraq in 2007, I remember we did like a handful of day missions. I mean, 3 or 4 at most. And one of the times I remember driving by, and I remember seeing a group of kids, about 6 or 7 kids out there in soccer playing soccer in like 110, 112 degree heat. And they're just playing around, having fun. And I'd step out of there and I feel like I just stepped into a sauna with a hair dryer just blowing in my face, you know, and all of us were like that. And it was really difficult to be effective in that heat. I mean, it was just something we just haven't acclimated to. So after seeing that, I started doing it here, especially the advantages of you know, the heat on your body, you know, for your joints, for your, you know, for your mobility. There's way less injuries. So not only that, but even more additional to it, I had one of my guys, he trained here, and he did, I think he was able to do 3 or 4 or 5 minute rounds. And then he was spent. He just couldn't do it anymore. It was too hot. He was done. That next day, he went down to Houston and trained at a place at AC. He gave me a call right after that and said, "Man, I just did 12 rounds. I couldn't find any more partners. That's why I stopped." So there is so much benefit. If you're willing to put yourself through that, there is a tremendous amount of benefit. But you can't always please everybody. So you have to fit in your environment, I guess, your training environment, what you feel most comfortable and most knowledgeable in, so you can actually make sure that they're getting what they need, how they need it, when they need it.
Mm-hmm. Like it. Shaun, what are your thoughts on the role of the coach?
Oh boy. So as I mean, just other than a few words that Alan just said, he basically said what's in my head. I mean, Alan just spoke for me, for reals. So I don't know what else to add other than I completely agree with what Alan has just listed off. And to his point, I've coached a few things in my life. I don't need to list them out, but there's been a variety of different things. And I've always been that way. I've always been maybe an older version of Alan, not doing it quite as well. So, in respect to BJJ, I'll just talk about that maybe as the example, because I had been a lifelong martial artist. When I decided to start doing BJJ, I didn't understand BJJ. I knew judo and stuff like that, but I didn't know anything about BJJ. And I just started training my 2 sons in our basement on the carpet. And you know what? I can watch all the videos in the world and eventually get my boys to a point where I wanted them to be, and get myself to a point where I wanted to be. I learned reasonably quick, and there's enough resources out there that I could have become fairly mediocre in BJJ. But that's not my way. I realized that because I am who I am and I have high expectations of everyone around me because I can see the awesomeness in them and I want them to see it sooner rather than later. I push hard, man. And so I didn't want to do that with my sons. So I thought, well, I better get them into a club where they can train so that I'm not coaching them because I don't want to ruin the love of BJJ by me being me. So I met a guy in our town. He was a purple belt. I was a zero stripe white belt in BJJ. And I invited him over to our house for a coffee. And his name is Greg. And I said, over a long conversation, I just said, look, I'd like you to start a BJJ club in our town. I'll be your very first student. And your second and third student will be my two sons. And we'll figure it out. I'll buy the mats. We'll figure out the rest. Let's just get after it. And what I needed was a different coach for my boys, and I needed someone who could teach me a way that wasn't my way. And so through over the last 8 years of BJJ, I've learned to better manage or hybridize my approach to training someone uh, and uh, and Greg's way to train someone, my coach's way to train someone. I'm still a bit of a hard ass for sure. And what made me smile when Alan was talking about not turning on the air conditioning. We lived in Sugarland, Texas for a couple of years, and I know how freaking hot it gets down there. I've raced in 24-hour solos up at Rocky Hill Ranch just outside of Austin. And I can think of one 24-hour solo where it never, I think it went down, the lowest it got was 99 degrees Celsius during the race. And the humidity was at 1 million%. And I mean, you just don't stop. You just keep on hammering. I can do that because I'm trained to do that. I'm used to do that. My body is used to it. But I had athletes that weren't used to that. They didn't have the same mindset as I had. And I was, of course, training in Texas at the time. So the heat was a non factor because I was always kicking my arse out in it. But I'd have Canadian athletes coming down to join me to race at Rocky Hill Ranch on these 24s. And I mean, it'd be February in Canada and they'd be prepping for a 2-4 in Texas. And so what would I have them doing? Like 6-hour rides on a trainer in their bathroom with the door closed and the fan off. Yeah. Get really uncomfortable, pal.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
More uncomfortable than you think you've ever been, and then go longer. So I was really hard on my athletes because I was preparing them for battle. You step on the start line, and my motto to my athletes was train in peace so that you don't have to bleed in war. So it's going to be hard. And they eventually they get right with the program, and then they respect you for it because they respect themselves for putting in the work and getting the outcome that they wanted, but more importantly, the outcome that they deserved by putting in the hard work, the nose to the grindstone, and not taking the shortcut way to the start line, taking the hard path to the start line so that you're ready to be in the game when the time counts. So I've had to learn to modify my coaching to some degree and not be quite as gritty. But I think that there's a sliding scale of I'll never get even remotely close to being a soft coach. I'm just not known as it, and I never will be it. And so I think that that's an important point to make that there's a coach out there for everyone. And there's far less coaches that hold the hard line. And I wish there were more that held the hard line. But for the few or the not many that hold the hard line, I'd love to give the shout out to them for just being awesome, for not backstepping or backsliding to meet the expectations of people who will always knock on your coaching door and say, I've heard about you. I know you create results. I'm in the game, but can we change the workout for tomorrow? Because I've got to go shopping. See you later. I mean, my way is my way, and it's a hard way, but it gets results. So shout out to all the coaches like Alan who have a standard that he never lets slip.
I like that.
There's a caveat to that though, because it does affect your business.
Yeah,
really
it does.
does.
It does for sure.
You know,
For sure it does.
I think the moment that I had like a realization that I need to change up and go into like a civilian mindset was there was a article written on BJJ Eastern Europe, and it had my picture on there, and they caught the picture at a perfect time, just as I was asking one of the athletes, what's your plan? What do you plan on doing when you get in there? And his response to me was, well, I'm going to pull guard and then I'm going to sweep. And I just looked at him. I was like, you're going to do what? And as I was like squinting and leaning in on him, they took that picture. And now it's on that article. And the headline is, does my coach hate me? And I was like, what is wrong with y'all? That's not you. I was just frustrated with that. But at the same time, I had to kind of take that with a grain of salt, because that was kind of like, okay, maybe some people are seeing it that way. And if I want to survive as a business, I'm going to have to modify some things. Some things are going to have to stay because I just refuse to change it. But some things I'm going to have to change in order to adapt so I can, survive as a business.
Yeah. When you say that, and I think I've actually seen the photo, but I can see it in my mind's eye. So I think that my headline for that photo would be, "This is how much my coach cares for me." For real. That's how I see those moments. A coach that cares holds you accountable. A coach that cares holds a standard. A coach that cares guides you to success, not to failure. And success requires hard work. It requires hard conversations. It requires hard internal looks at yourself on how to harden up. BJJ is not tiddlywinks. A tiddlywink coach wouldn't lean in and say, "You did what?" They just set up the board game for you and get back to tiddlywinks again. So I think that there's an important distinction between the imagery of how media or anyone can spin a story, or the internet rumors that are out there about hard coaches, or whatever the case is. That there's always a headline that can be the complete opposite of reality for coaches that really, really care so much that they will hold their athletes or their clients or the people that they're looking after or wanting the best for, hold them to such a high standard that that person gets to see their best version of themselves.
Yes, indeed. I think the key to this is that for the average person, the regular Joe, the person who's never done martial arts before and decides that, hey, I'm going to try out BJJ, and their coach is in, say, more, I guess, intense. It's not really a great word for it, but similar to you guys in that they hold a standard, and that standard is not wavering one little bit, is that level of intensity can be seen as, or can be interpreted as, anger versus not, right? And like, I know that you guys don't get angry in that moment. You're trying to push that person to be the best that they can be in that moment. But the for the average Joe coming at it from this side of it, it can feel like it's being like it's directed anger. So it's like, I'm not doing my job, therefore this person is angry at me, and you don't really know where to go from there. And I can see it in a lot of in quite a lot of competitors and coaches and their interactions with each other, in that sometimes the coach has to soften the approach in order to get that person to not feel like they're being berated, if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
There's when I'm not going to apologize for it because I don't feel bad about it. But I do know that I should soften my stance from time to time, because sometimes when I'm explaining to someone, hey, listen, this is the way it is, sometimes I've got a little bit of sizzle to me. And that little bit of sizzle sometimes puts people off, but I'm not trying to set them on fire. I'm just trying to help them understand that there is a standard. And if you want to be in the game that I play, meet the standard. If you want to really if you really want to go all in, exceed the standard. But a bare minimum is meet the standard. There is no not meeting the standard. Because if that's what you're interested in, there's a coach down the street called the No Standard Coach. And there's options out there for everyone. And I'm not throwing the No Standard Coach under the bus because there's a need for that. Look, there's people who want to get in all kinds of games. And if they're dabblers, well, there's places for dabblers. But there has to be a place for people who want to pursue their most awesome version of themselves. And some want to do it over the course of an entire lifetime, and some want to do it over the course of 2 days. If it can't be done in 2 days, it sure can be done in a lifetime. But for most people, it probably takes 5 to 10 years to start seeing a better version of themselves that they can sit back and really be proud of what they've accomplished. But if you're wanting to engage in a fiery heat of optimal performance in the shortest period of time, let's not kid ourselves. It's a hard path, and it requires hard leadership and hard mentorship and hard set boundaries of operate within these tight parameters while you're feeling a bit of heat. And if you can just hang on for the ride, I'll get you there sooner than most.
Alan, you got any thoughts?
You're not setting them on fire. You're trying to set a fire in their ass.
Yeah, that's right.
Get
That's
'em
right.
moving.
100%. Yeah, get them moving.
Yeah.
I like that.
Now, what I
sorry, go ahead.
one of the important lessons that I learned from my very first instructor, I'm not going to even mention his name because it's not worth it, but I learned so much from him on what not to do. One of the big things was he would show 2 or 3 techniques a night, different ones from different positions. And then at the end of the same class or near the end, like, hey, you know what? I had a question regarding this one thing on, do I put my arm in and over? And, how do I do that? And I'm having problems with that same technique that you just showed. And he'd look me dead in the eye. He was dead serious. You know what? That's a great question for a private. Now, nowadays, that's one thing, but keep in mind, I was an E2 at the time, right? Or E3. I was an E3. So I was making take home was like $860 a month. I was still living in the barracks. And so when someone said, well, $100 for a private, I'm like, man, that's a seventh of my total income for the month. You know what I mean? Just to answer a question of something that you failed to show the details on and what you just showed. So I was really like, it was because he was the only one that had that, and I didn't want to quit the sport, so I had to put up with that. And the other thing was, you remember the videotapes that were out? Mario Sperry had one.
Oh yeah,
freaking phenomenal. Yes. To this day, I think it's probably one of the most entertaining video series I've ever seen. I talked to him about that at the IBJJF Masters Worlds. I literally got to talk to him and like, man, hands down, the most entertaining instructional I've ever seen. And but the thing is that there was another guy in the class, and he's like, he walks in and he's like, hey, he's going to go over taking the back. He's going to go over a shoulder lock from there, and then he's going to go over a choke, and then he's going to talk about something that happened to him where some guy pulls out a gun. And I was looking at him, I was like, how? What? Okay. So we're sitting there, and of course he's got the fake Brazilian accent. All right, my friends. So we're going to go over how to take the back. And this guy's from Texas. And he tried to like put an accent on his name, try to church it up.
Dang.
So, and I'm not kidding you. Like I kept looking over. I was like, how did you know this? And then he goes, then he would take his back. But if you don't put it here, what happened down in Brazil when I was down there, he'd grab a gun, he'd go, and he'd just shoot you in the head. So I've seen this happen. I've seen it. You cannot do it without. I was like, okay. At the end of class, I was like, how did you do that? And he pulled out a tape, and he's like, this is everything he's doing. So he's literally watching a video and then showing it to everybody else.
No way.
But not even original, not even like breaking it up to something else or using his own, like, testimonial on, the effectiveness of it. He was literally just using someone else's story that was in there. So lazy. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's bonkers.
Yeah. I got a couple comments here and then a question from Tanya. So I just want to hit on these real quick. Doc C says, "Are you guys going on today?" So apologize for being late. We were listening.
Alan was telling good stories.
Good
I mean,
stories.
y'all can wait. Yeah. It was a great story.
Kate says, "Morning, gents. Hope y'all are well." Doc C says, "Reminds me of wrestlers and how they train." Absolutely, going hard in the paint for sure. Celtic Mick, hello everyone. Good to go. Andrew Corey, morning guys. Hope y'all are doing well. Doc C says you need a collective rash guard.
I'm wearing one.
Good idea.
They're in the works. Don't worry.
I just came back from a drop zone out here jumping with a bunch of veterans, and a guy who follows me on Instagram, cool guy, Kieran. Shout out to Kieran. He runs a company called Samurai Soap, and he just walked up to me, shook my hand, gave me a rash guard, and said, "There you go." And I threw it on right on the DZ. I was walking around saying, "Y'all want to get double legged? Who wants to get double legged?" And I drove back here to the hotel, lickety split. I'm still wearing it, still sweating in it. So yeah, we need our own rash guard for sure.
Yes, we do. We'll get those sorted out very soon. I was talking with Corey the other day. Shirts, rash guards, all kinds of stuff. We got plans. Don't you worry. Doc C says, "Let's go, Shabaro." Good to see him on here for this topic. Very intuitive for coaching. And then he's kind of giggling, Alan Gracie. Tanya has two comments and then a question and then a comment. She says, "I have a theory that most regular people don't realize that soft skills are soft skills: communication, listening, work ethic, leadership, teamwork." What do you guys think? Is that a good theory?
I don't know. That's actually a good question. I've never really thought of that.
I mean, I think that we're pretty good at all of those things. It's just how to translate it to, using Tanya's terms, and this is how I think, regular people. And so I think that communication, listening, work ethic, leadership, teamwork, those are all the things that are important to a special operations team, and many other things, of course. However, to translate those into the regular world or regular people, I think first off, to Alan's point, just to dial back our intensity. As I said, I'm a kind of intense guy, and I do need to dial my rotary dial back to some degree when I'm having a conversation with someone where I'm trying to communicate things like communication, listening, work ethic, leadership, and teamwork. But I believe the hybridized model, just like my coach, Greg, has demonstrated to me, is not quite leadership by example, but demonstrating through example of trying to do things well without trying to be too special operations-ish about it. So what I'd said to Greg when we first started off the Roslyn BJJ club is that, and he had no instructional experience. And I'd said to him, "Dude, I've been teaching so many things for so long. That's what the Army taught me to do, and I'll help you do it. I'll help you learn how to teach." His teaching style became his own, and his teaching style is probably more effective than my teaching style on the mats for certain people. And so, to that point, SOF skills that we have and how to translate that out into the regular world, there's a lot of people out there that are for us. And then there's a lot of people out there that are for coaches like my coach, Greg. And so, to that point, there's someone out there for everyone. The distinction between, I'll call them non-SOF coaches and SOF coaches, is that we probably bring a lot more to the table in the way of life experiences, ironically, to Alan's story about the fake Brazilian goof who was doing the video stories. I mean, Alan probably has so many stories that are real world relevant that he hasn't translated into his classes on a regular basis, but he has enough wherewithal to give relevancy to certain positions or movements or patterns that are real world based, that he doesn't have to stop the class in mid class and tell everyone a 15-minute long story about that one time that he had to ... I mean, it's enmeshed or interwoven in his entire life. And so Alan represents the SOF ethos. He represents the experienced lifestyle on how things like BJJ are practical in the real world. So I think that SOF skills are that we have many, and I think that it can be hybridized for sure for anyone. But again, I wouldn't want to ever water down an SOF coach into a regular coach. And I know those are crude terms, but that's just how I feel.
Alan, you got any thoughts on that?
No, it took the words out of my mouth, man.
you guys are actually just one person.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, there's really not much I can add on to that. There's, and I think I'm not sure, and the reason why that kind of threw me off, Tanya, was I was born on military base. I grew up watching soldiers do PT since I was like 5 years old. Then went in the Army myself, so I don't really know what most non-military people think the skill sets are. So I never really put that much into it. But the way that Shaun summed it up was, yeah, I agree.
I think the average person sees soft skills as what they see in the movies, right? It's mag changes and transitions, and you know, I can run really far and I can do really hard things. But I really actually like this. I think that of the many special operations people that I've talked to, their ability to communicate and listen are probably two of their most developed skills.
Yeah.
And I think that's so I'm down, Tanya. I think that's a pretty good thing. Now she has a question specifically for you, Alan, right here, which is, what has your pioneering BJJ in your social circles taught you about how to elicit buy-in from others? What do you think?
Elicit buy-in.
Like to get people interested in it. Like if you're saying, you know, you wanted to get your friends into BJJ, not everybody's going to be into BJJ, right? So how do you get those people to actually want to be there?
That is a really difficult one. The believe it or not, I don't like to use this example all the time, but especially for women, and men, it's the most simplistic way and the easiest way that the people can comprehend across the whole spectrum is you're gaining not only a discipline where you have fitness and it's a mental, you're playing, it's a human chess game. So you have the mental aspect, you have the physical aspect, but you're learning a skill set that hopefully you'll never need if it ever comes up. But if it does come up, you'll be prepared for it. And so it's not like, going to gymnastics or going to, getting a skill set, anything else, where the applicability of it literally could be life-changing and life-saving if you stay in it. And so those two things about being life-changing and being life-saving, I think, is usually the key thing that ties people in to, no matter what background you have, you're not only gaining a physical fitness pattern and schedule and discipline, but it's a skill set that's applicable outside of here that could increase your well-being in your life as well as possibly save it one day.
I like that. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this particular question?
Yeah, buy-in is a really funny one because I feel that there is no universal rule for that. I don't think that there is a 3-step process to encourage or ensure someone gets on the mats for that first night. Everyone's so different. And so the ability to talk and listen to the unique individual in front of you is key to getting them on the mats. And then if they're listening and you're talking, but they're still not on the mats, well, now you have to leadership them to the mats. And these are all SOF skills. I look at a person in front of me, the moment that they start talking about BJJ as a mission, I just figure out a way to not Jedi mind trick them into getting on the mats. I look at them as a puzzle or the mission puzzle on how to get them on a mat. And I'll use an example here, a recent example. in my town, Roslyn, BC. I've got a friend. He's a good guy, and he knows that I'm into BJJ. He's been tracking me for quite a long time. And about a year ago, he said, "Hey, it looks fun. You're rolling with your boys. You're doing this. I enjoy your videos, etc. One of these days, I'm gonna try it." And I said, "Yeah, well, today's a day. So which day is it that you're gonna try it? This one day or another one day? Because we can make it happen. I've got the keys to the club. We can do it now. 10 minutes from now." This evening, whenever you want, buddy, I'll open the door and it'll be just you and me. You'll get a boutique entry into what BJJ is all about. And he said, "Yeah, let me think about it." It went on for about a year, and he's a squash player. And I knew we were getting close when he started making comparisons to squash. And he said, "You know what? Squash is really hard. You gotta do this. You gotta do that." And I said, "Yeah, you know what? It's not that hard. I know you think it's hard, but you just haven't done BJJ. So you got to find the angle. You've got to like almost assault the ego. You've got to tease the ego. You got to entice the ego. You got to challenge the ego. Whatever you got to do to get them on the mats, or at least that's what I think. And I'm not like being a goof. I'm just trying to find a way that is fun for them and fun for me. So he hit me with the, well, like squash is so hard. And I said, define for me how hard it is. What do you think that makes it hard? He said, well, it's kind of like three-dimensional chess. You're moving this way, that way, and blah blah blah. I said, "Oh, that's interesting. It sounds pretty hard, but not as hard as BJJ." He said, "No, squash is way harder than BJJ." I said, "Okay, let me throw this at you, and then I expect an answer back by this evening. When you're playing squash three-dimensionally, have you ever played squash against squash that's also three-dimensional, except that squash thinks better than you do? Have you ever played against a three-dimensional robot called squash that is smarter than you? That's me. Now it's two people playing three-dimensional squash against each other, and it's called BJJ. And you'll find it challenging, buddy, no matter how much three-dimension chess you've played." And he said, well, maybe I'd like to give that a go." And I said, "See you tonight at 7 o'clock." And so we met up, and anyway, we sat down on the mats, and I explained a few things to him. If someone taps on the mat, taps on the leg, taps on you, blah blah blah, verbally taps, the purpose of this is what it'll give you, the benefits, etc. And I asked all the usual questions. Do you have a background in martial arts? Do you have this? Do you have any injuries? Do you have any concerns? What would you like to learn? Have you ever been and this was really interesting to me because the first time I'd ever had an answer like this, I said, "Have you ever been in a moment, any time in your life, as a kid, as an adult, an uncomfortable position where you thought to some degree maybe you were being threatened, or you felt really uncomfortable? Maybe there was a couple of sketchy guys across the street eyeballing you, thought they were going to steal your wallet overseas or whatever?" And his answer was, "No, I've never felt that. I've never been in trouble. I've never had any fights. I've never blah, blah, blah." I said, "So you've got no martial arts. You've never been threatened. You feel like it's a pretty safe world out there." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you're the luckiest guy in the world, because that luck may end tonight or it may end tomorrow, but you've been a really lucky guy." And I said, "So again, you've never had any martial arts experience?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Okay, well, did a few other things." And I said, "So this is how we start. We just tap, bump, and we're going to start standing. And so I'm just going to connect to you, and then we'll just see where it goes from there. The last thing I'm going to say to you, pal, is this: how sore you are over the next 48 hours is going to be determined by you. If you work too hard, you'll be sore tomorrow. And you are the one who's going to decide how hard you work. Because I'm not going to do anything to you. You're going to do it all to yourself. So the more you struggle, the more you try to beat me, the more you try to fight me, what you're doing is literally deciding how sore you're going to be tomorrow. So my advice to you is think about tomorrow and the day after and try not to be sore." And he said, "Oh, yeah, okay, cool, cool, cool." So the moment that I connected with him, just a little grip back behind the neck, I knew right away that he'd done something. And so as we started moving around, just playing, I'm feeling him out, and he was never a problem at all. But he's strong, he moves fast, and he had good proprioception. He had good body awareness. He knew how to move, but he knew how to move like a fighter. And so at the end of it, I played around with him for a while, and let him work hard. And by the end, he was out of breath, sweating as per usual, and his eyes were in the back of his head, and his head was spinning, and all that good stuff. And I said, "Hey, just got a quick question for you. Once you've had a time to catch your breath and process what just happened, I'm going to come back and I'd appreciate an answer. You said that you'd never done martial arts before, but I don't think that that's the case. So just think about that. I'll be back in a minute. Just take your time." And I got back to him and I said, "Hey, so what do you think?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I guess after thinking about it, I wrestled with my brother through most of our lives. And I could feel it in him, of course. You know how that feels." Um, and so what he'd never experienced is someone controlling him like that before. And he was hooked. He loved it. And I'll see him again on the mats, of course, when I get back to town. My point being that there's a way to encourage anyone onto the mats, and there's a way to encourage them even more once they're on the mats. But it's our job to have the sensitivity for each unique puzzle that's in front of us, or as I like to think, an SOF mission puzzle to solve on that unique individual that I want to make more awesome through the trajectory of BJJ.
Yeah. I really, it's funny because I've always explained jujitsu like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while underwater being attacked by a jaguar. And it usually gets a laugh out of people. And they're like, "What do you mean?" And then I can actually break it down a little bit, but just enough to get them relaxed about it. Whereas some people get really tense, like, "Oh
You
my
know,
God."
I
You're like,
find myself like more along the lines of explaining um, retention, how to keep them, because one of the most common things that I see is the frustration of new white belts. They don't feel like they're ever progressing. They don't feel like they're ever, getting better. They're not picking things up. And that's what I try to like explain to them. Like they're like, I can't remember, how to get there and and which angle to take for that. It's just not making sense. And that there's two different analogies that I like to use. One of them is when you first moved to Dallas, did you know anything about the city? No. So you literally had to explore little by little how to get around to this place, how to find this building, how to go to the Bank of America, how to go to the Wells Fargo, how to go to the grocery store. And the more that you continue going, the more familiar the place becomes. And now, before you know it, within a year or two, hey, I need to find a specialty shop for lamps. Okay, I know where to go. Hey, you're going to go down here, take a left, and then the right, and then you're going to go to the second story of this one building. It's going to be right up there. Well, it took time for you to develop that understanding of which routes to take, which ones not to go, because it's a one-way street. And so it's a lot easier for them to comprehend, give them something they can actually relate to, um, rather than something they're still trying to figure out. So that has been one of them. The other one is, you're writing a book. At first, you got to learn the alphabet. Then you got to learn how to put sentences together. Then you got to learn a paragraph. Then you're putting a chapter together. And then you're creating a chapter. And then you guess what? That's your first book. Now you have the second one. There's your blue belt. And you got to do the same thing. And now you're, more complex sentences, and now more developed paragraphs, so things like that. Before you know it, you have your 5 volumes right here ready to go, and you're still building. So I like to have different ways, different approaches, but more than bringing them in is helping them realize that they're not alone in that factor where they get frustrated because they want to do well and just don't know how yet. And to let them patience, along with relax.
I don't know how many times I've said relax. Jiu-jitsu, so many times. You've probably said it many, many, many more times than I have. Any other thoughts? I got another couple comments here and a question.
Hit the comments, buddy.
Okay, so we got Doc C hits us with, I see soft skills definitely with Green Berets and a little bit with Delta, but obviously my sample size is limited. And he says Navy SEALs too. So
I'd throw that in there.
Throw it into the back end.
Yeah, exactly. And then Carl's got a really good question here. And he says, have any of you had to intervene in a situation where a coach was abusive? And how did you de-escalate the situation? And what did you learn?
For myself, not abusive per se, just I would I would say abusive in the way of teaching, but not being abusive. So I hold a pretty strong stance on how to do things properly. And so there is a proper way to respect people. There is a proper way to teach people. There's a proper way to encourage people. And then, contrary to that, there's a way to belittle people. There's a way to demean people. There's a way to be mean spirited. And so, if we're just going to use those two loose boundary constructs, I think any coach that operates closer to the doing it right is good, and any closer to the doing it completely wrong, then I'm interested in somehow trying to improve that situation for all parties. So intervene maybe is a strong word, but I will say that I will recalibrate over a period of time, as about as loosely as I'm going to frame it. If I see anything that is quote unquote abusive, then I'll certainly step in.
Alan?
I wouldn't say intentionally, but I did have, it was actually one of my first black belts. I had to actually let him go. I told him, man, you just can't keep training here if you're going to keep doing this. And he kept doing it, but he didn't have, he had one speed that he could go, and it didn't matter who it was with. So at first it was, wrist locks, again, a black belt on a purple belt, if you don't know how to control a wrist lock, you know what I mean? They're going to get hurt. And so I'm watching all these guys, taping up their wrists before class. I'm like, what happened? Wrist lock. I'm like, well, what happened? Was it like a white belt that did it? And they, like, no one wanted to say anything. And then literally, like, I think it was like a week later that it opened, Matt, I hear someone screaming in the back. I'm like, what happened? And he's like holding his wrist. And I was like, have you been doing this to everyone else? Like, yeah, but you should have tapped. I'm like, are you giving them time to tap? And you do realize that you have like a decade of experience on them. So we had a talk about that. And then it was another class that when someone is in turtle, you can grab the back of lapel and drive your knee into their back and pull them and open that up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're a 220-pound man and you're going against a 135-pound female that's a purple belt, I mean, there's got to be some understanding, like there's limits that you need to respect, because not everyone's here going, it's not the world championships and it's not a life or death situation. You're just training. So if it was the intentional hurting of someone versus the pain that comes out of training. One's intentional, one is not. One is deliberate. You're trying to hurt someone to actually bend their will, versus using the technique that you could go around and not hurt them and give an opportunity to tap. Mm-hmm. So when it happened, when I caught it the second time, the first time I was like, it probably was an accident. But when I saw all the other things happening that I didn't witness, and then I saw it the second time, I was like, man, we can't do this anymore, man. We're friends, always going to be friends, but I just can't have you training here. And he hasn't been back since. It was unfortunate because he's one of my first black belts.
That's a good call, though.
Yeah, good call. There's unfortunately, when it comes down to I see this a lot in the world of jiu-jitsu, and it's unfortunate, is that there are a lot of competitors out there that put the medal or the competition ahead of everything else, which, I mean, I get the desire to win, but if you're hurting all your training partners on the way there, what's the point, right? You're not really you're not developing your own skill set. You're not giving yourself the capability. If the only way you can win is to hurt the person that you're training with, then you're not doing jiu-jitsu right. Like, it's meant to be the gentle art, is it not? That's the term itself.
Well, it's supposed to be, but I believe that's a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah, I agree.
Of course. And I will say this: injuries are going to happen in a tough game. Name all kinds of sports. Football, you know what? People are getting hurt. And in that sport, some people are getting hurt by accident. Some people are getting hurt as an outcome of playing the sport. Some people are getting hurt because they're being hurt intentionally. every sport has its black belt wrist lockers, and so some will do it well, some will do it not mean spirited, but just a little too competitive, a little bit too aggressive. I'm an aggressive guy. I'm a competitive guy. And it took me a while. It probably took me until I got to blue belt. And even my early days of blue belt, I was still probably a little too fiery. But now being in the game long enough that I don't care. I don't care what happens. And if someone's putting the boots to me, okay, so be it. I don't have to put the boots to anyone else. I can slow my game down and have fun with the art now. But it took me a while to learn how to have fun. I mean, I was having fun, but in an entirely different way that maybe wasn't as palatable for others. And so you have to learn how to play with other humans. I don't think anyone steps onto the mat on day one and knows how to play fairly and even keeled with every single human on the planet. If you're a passive person, or if you're an aggressive person, put either of those two onto a mat and they're going to face someone on that mat that throws them for a loop. If you're passive, then you're going to face someone aggressive. That's going to throw you for a loop. If you're aggressive, you're going to face someone who's passive. It's going to throw you for a loop. It's like learning, as Alan said, it's like learning how to read or write. You start from nothing and you have to learn how to communicate through human movement. And through that human movement, you're then supposed to evolve to a level where you learn how to communicate through the vibe. Just by touching someone, you know their intent. Just by putting your finger on their shoulder, you should understand that person right away if you've been in the game long enough of reading the vibe, of synchronizing up in the moment. And irrespective of whether you're passive or aggressive, if you've been in the game long enough, you can still be who you are authentically, but you'll learn how to communicate that to the other person in a way that they can kind of synchronize up with you if they're cool. But there's always the outliers who don't synchronize, who don't get the vibe, who are reluctant to change their velocity. And I mean, to Alan's point, I guess he had to draw a line in the sand there to some degree.
Now, there's the opposite end of the spectrum as well. So one of the things that one of the outcomes of that was I changed up the rules of my gym to where I don't have any male white belts rolling with any female white or blue belts. Like, I stopped doing that altogether. And it's not now once they're purple belt, roll with anyone you want, any size you want. But what I found is that a white belt, it's not intentional. But when you have someone that's athletic and that's a male, they only have their athleticism and strength that they can use for that sport. They don't know any technique. So they don't know how to control that in that environment yet. So when they're rolling, they might not know, how to get out an arm bar. So the only thing they're thinking is, well, I can use my weight now and just smash. You know what I mean? Because they don't know anything else. So it's not deliberate by any means. It's not intentional injury that they're trying to cause. They're just trying to escape. But the only thing they have is weight and strength at the moment, zero technique. So what I found is that when I bring those guys back, and the male white belts, they got all the male white belts can roll with male white belts. It doesn't matter, because at least it's weight categorically is a lot more closer together than it would be for, a 120-pound female with a 230-pound male. And where we're giving up a drastic difference. And again, it's not like their skill set is developed so much that they can fend off from someone that has that much weight and strength backing them up. So there's give and take on that. I haven't had nearly as many injuries, and I've actually grown the women's size of my class drastically for that, to the point where now I have 3 female black belts and at least a dozen female brown belts, purple, blue, and some new ones that just started up.
Awesome. It's an interesting game, and I think I really enjoy the fact that I've been able to talk to you guys about the coaching side of it too, being like looking at it from the top down. Tanya's got a great comment here. She says, leading by example has helped. Watching Gary Tonin verbally tap regularly as he puts himself in disadvantageous positions taught me that if he's not too proud or stubborn to tap, I shouldn't be. And I think that's a great point. I've actually just recently learned that I don't need to destroy everyone I'm rolling with. And if they tap me, they tap me. It's training, right? It doesn't really matter that much, other than the fact that I get more reps in. So if I tap early, cool, I get another rep. Let's do it.
I'd like to add something on Gary Tonin. It's great that Tanya, and of course she's had the experience training down there and has seen it herself. It's great to hear that that's what he does, because that's not what I thought he did. Because I'd read and heard many times that he, not that he refuses to tap, but there was a little bit of a, maybe it's an urban legend out there, whatever the case is, that he was a guy who did everything he could not to tap. And so just reading that alone is again, the importance of these kind of conversations. If not for reading that or hearing that from Tanya, I would have categorized Gary Tonin as the guy who refuses to tap kind of thing. Now I'm loosely categorizing it, but we're supposed to set those examples. We're supposed to be able to read those comments. We're supposed to be able to put this stuff out to the interweb so that people can understand that the things you see or the things you hear or the things that you think may not be true. And calling it out like Tanya just did has been good for me to learn that. So thanks, Tanya.
Yeah, there you go. And then we got one more comment here from Andrew. He said, what was that BJJ Jaguar reference? Yeah, I said it was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube underwater while being attacked by a Jaguar. And
well, my thought when you said that first time was like, bro, rule number 1 in the gym is clip your nails before you get on the mat. So the Jaguar doesn't count. And like, what is a Jaguar doing underwater? Why not an octopus, man?
Octopus is a good one. Yeah. But have you ever seen a Jaguar take on an alligator jump in a river?
I'm actually scrubbing my brain right now.
Yes, you should. So, and we're just about at time here. So let's get some final thoughts, and we'll shut her down for the afternoon. Alan, you got any final thoughts on the role of the coach or anything that we've talked about so far today?
One of the biggest things that I've felt is, to add on to what Shaun and Tanya was saying about Gary Tonin, was I told my guys all the time, I have tapped more than everybody here at a PAC class put together your entire career, doubled. And that gives them that sense, because, you know, it's not that I don't ever get tapped. My philosophy is, if you're doing the technique right, you will continue, and you might even get me to tap, because you're doing the technique right. But at any point in time, you try to get a shortcut, you try to get out of it, you try to, muscle your way through, I'm going to slip out and you'll never get me. But if you take your time, and I always try to get my pace matched up with theirs and raise it up just a little bit so they can catch up. But once they get there, I'll raise it up just a little bit more. And that way they have this, the confidence of going, that if they're doing the things right, good outcomes will come out of it. So it's really important to let them know, especially when they look up to you, well, I've never seen him tap, so I'm not tapping. No. Tap often, tap, make sure that they know that you're tapping, find a good way of doing it. And don't be afraid to do that. It's not an ego thing. It's longevity, because every time that you might even think, oh, just a little pop, that's a micro tear. And those little micro tears are going to build up over and over again. You want to stay in this long enough, then before you know it, you're going to be walking around where you can't even straighten out your elbow, because you have so much scar tissue built up in there. You didn't even realize where it came from, constantly.
And it's a slow build, right?
Yeah.
You rarely see it all at once, but yeah. Shaun, any final thoughts?
Well, I think, Alan, you should timestamp what Alan just did there. Write it down, buddy, because
I already got it written down. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I think that what Alan just described is literally coaching. So he's assigned a safe process in order to get someone to understand the standard. And in that standard, he's helping that person understand how to communicate physically and mentally and emotionally in the moment by synchronizing with them. He stated he synchronizes his workload to them. He synchronizes his resistance to them, what they're capable of. But he just takes it just a touch higher, just to encourage them to do better, to seek more, to explore more in the moment. And I think that's coaching, man. You know, learn how to communicate. Never let the standard go backwards. Always encourage people to exceed the standard in a way that is achievable for them, given the velocity that they're comfortable with in the timeline that they want to get better in. So thanks for that, Alan.
Mm-hmm. And
I got to admit, real quick,
go ahead.
before time's up,
No, we're good. Go ahead.
didn't even recognize my hat. Come on,
I
now.
did.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
right away it was straight up solid.
Come on.
So good.
I used the picture with you in that hat for the for the poster too. It was actually quite surprising when you had it on. I was like, yeah.
I haven't even seen the poster yet. I didn't know about the hat.
It is pretty sweet. If anybody doesn't know, it is in reference to the FSSF, the First Special Service Force from back in World War II, stood up as the it's the originators of special forces, is it not, in general? But mixed unit between Canadians and Americans, and they kicked some serious ass all over Europe throughout the war. And then,
just if I can, because I am totally down with the patch. I'm here with my mountain biking helmet, but I'm going to be jumping in it. So on one side, I've got my Pathfinder torch, but what's on the other side? That's right, buddy. That's right.
Same thing. Love it. I unfortunately never earned one of those, but I will. I got one thing, and it's this one.
Good man. Good man.
That's the one. But yeah, so as we all learn how to coach, how to be coached, and how to do all those other things, we can build ourselves into the specimen that we're supposed to be, especially in BJJ and many other things, and that allow us to grow into better people, better humans. And you can do that with us here on The Collective every day. We'll see you all tomorrow. Chimo.